And welcome to Two Steps Ahead podcast. My name is Son Edom.
And I'm Tara Shiro.
And we'd like to welcome you to this episode. And on the episode today, we're going to talk about something that is difficult to deal with, a difficult topic. That is the topic of loss. Loss when it comes to losing somebody we love, as in grief, losing a job perhaps, or maybe even losing a significant other, like a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a spouse or something like that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And if I can just take a moment to share a quick story about my experience with loss. So I was back in high school, and I had a really good friend of mine that I knew since the first grade. And he was like a brother to me. His family was like a second family. And we were out one night. I was out actually on a date one night, and I actually happened to run across him and his sister and some other people from his school, because we went to the same elementary school, but we went to different high schools. And so I came across him one night up at Universal City Walk, which is now. And we talked for a little bit, and we were making plans to maybe do something in the next few weeks. And so it was a good night. The next morning, I'm lying in bed, and the phone rings. So naturally, I answer it. And it's another friend of mine on the end of the line. And he proceeds to tell me that my friend Chris, who I just saw the night before, had died in a car crash later that evening.
Wow.
He was 17 years old. I guess he was coming home from taking somebody home on the 210 freeway, if you're familiar with Los Angeles, up in the Tujunga area. And he ended up being involved in a car crash and dying.
Wow. And
so in high school, being at a young age, it was hard to kind of handle that, because we had made plans to go to USC. We were going to be roommates at USC. And we had made plans to start kind of formulating what we're going to do in college and make those plans. And then all of a sudden, in a blink of an eye, in a phone call, much like everybody else who I'm sure got that same phone call, lives changed. And so for me, I decided not to go to USC because I wasn't in the mood anymore. And I decided to choose a different path, went to broadcasting school and moved on. But in high school, you're not really equipped to deal with loss. I don't think anybody really is equipped to deal with loss.
No, I don't think so.
But in high school, being 18, and I was just a few days after my 18th birthday, dealing with loss, a lot of emotion was running through me at that time. Obviously, the sadness and the grief of losing him. And then for some reason, it was kind of weird, because guilt started to set in, not because I was alive, but because maybe I should have done more to help the family during that time. Maybe I should have been there more, because his parents were like my second parents.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, how do you start to process all this, And it was kind of new territory for me to kind of deal with that loss. And they say time heals all wounds. I think time scabs all wounds. The wounds
time
are still there.
Time heals nothing. Yes. I don't know what time heals. And that's interesting, because, my daughter has the exact same story. She was in high school, freshman, you were a senior, right?
I was a senior, yes.
Yeah. So my daughter was a freshman in high school, and just a couple of days after the end of freshman year, a couple of days after the high school had graduated, the senior class, she too was in a catastrophic car accident and lost her life. And we received a phone call late at night, telling us what happened. And of course, we went to the hospital, as did 50 other people. And we were camped out there for a couple of days, and then she was an organ donor, so it took a couple of days for to go through that process. But man, as a freshman in high school, senior in high school, it's awful. It is awful for kids to go through that. And then recently, I live in Santa Clarita, and so we just coming off of that school shooting. It just happened a couple of days ago, and so that's still fresh in the community, and still preparing for those funerals. And how do you process that?
And then, another kind of story to kind of relate. So then moving on later in life, just a few years ago, there was a series of people that I knew that passed away. I had two cousins pass away, one from cancer, one from suicide. And then I had a couple other friends that kind of passed away from illnesses, from cancer to other things. And it just, even relating back to the story being 18, having lost a friend of mine, and then fast forward years later in life, being more of an adult, having that loss, nothing changes. I mean, loss is loss, grief is grief. And when you're dealing with death, I think that's one of the hardest things to manage is to how do you handle those feelings? Because again, we had talked about it in an earlier podcast about success and how there's this box that people are supposed to live in. And I think sometimes too, people will put a box on grief and be like, hey, this is how you should grieve. This is how long you should grieve for. This is how your sadness should be. And then you got to get over it. In fact, I had a coworker one time who lost her husband to an illness. And she eventually moved on from the radio station I was at. And a couple years later, she came back to visit it. Now, it'd been like 2 years since the passing of her husband. And she was telling us a story that, she started losing friends and her friend group started to kind of break up because they were tired of her grieving. And someone made the comment, it's been 2 years, you should get over it by now.
I know. I hear that complaint a lot from people who have lost people, that is something that people, well-meaning people will say. And it's hard to enter into the grief process with other people. So, you losing your friend or you losing, family members, it would be like me grieving with you. Although it's different, for me because I didn't know the people that you do, but it's that carrying each other's grief that is so hard for us that we don't even want to grieve ourselves, let alone be patient enough to walk through the grief process with somebody else because everybody's pace is different. There's no and there's stages that we go through in grief, and hopefully we can handle it, healthier at different stages, but there's no set end time. There's no set like, okay, 6 weeks, 6 years, you're done, and it's hard for people on the outside to carry that weight.
Yeah, I remember, so this happened in high school. I remember the 10-year anniversary of my friend's death. I was out of state working in Nebraska at a radio station, so I wasn't here. But for the 20-year kind of anniversary, I reached out to his family and we kind of formed a mini 20-year kind of anniversary remembrance. We let off balloons and just kind of, spent some time reminiscing about some stories. And then we just recently had the 30-year, celebration, and which was this past February. Of 2019. And I remember the comment that his mom made because it had been 2 kind of 10-year celebrations. And she said, for the 40, you guys are going to have to carry on the tradition because his parents are now in their 80s and they might not be around. Wow. And that was kind of like, kind of a smack upside the head because, you start to think about the longevity of how this story has played out with the loss. And that just kind of hit home like, but on the flip side, it was almost kind of like a relief on their part because they will no longer be here to have to bury that burden of having lost a child. So my question to you then would be, what was the process? Because for me, when I was 17 or 18, whatever it was, and had the loss of my friend Chris, there was no real grief process for me. I didn't go talk to anybody. I didn't have counseling. I just kind of dealt with it myself.
Yeah.
Talked with some people. I had a couple people that came to me that were older, like in college that I knew that from a group, and they would kind of just check on me and make sure I was okay. It was through a church group. And so, but I really kind of just dealt with it myself. But for when your daughter went through, the grieving process and the loss process, what did you guys do? How did she handle it?
Didn't.
Yeah.
It is still very difficult for us to talk about it to this day. And it's been, Lindsay died in 2011, I believe. So it's been 8 years since she's passed. And it is very difficult for my daughter to talk about it. No, I don't know that I think she talks about it with her friends, but I'm not sure. But she has pictures, to this day, stickers on our car, that we, remember her dearly. We go to the memorials and the cemetery. She doesn't talk about it verbally. And I've always wondered if that is, a hindrance. Now she has written, college application letters or other things about that incident, about that time in her life. But she's very kind of stoic in that area. And I always wonder if, why the words just don't come. It's hard to, I guess, when you're not, she had a community of people. Obviously they were freshmen in high school. So for the next 3 years, it was a little bit rough. Obviously they were best friends, and so rearranging the friend group. But some people say, let's not talk about it, let's move on. Other people want to talk about it all the time.
Well, see, and that's the point that I want to try to get to with this is that, again, people will put limits. Other people will put limits. Other people will tell you how to grieve. Other people will tell you how to handle the situation, and then you move on. Now, granted, we seek help. We seek people out to give us advice on how to handle grief, how to deal with it. Obviously, we need an outlet sometimes to get this grief out, to get this loss out, the pain out. And so we want to do that in a good, constructive way. But also on the flip side, it's okay. I guess the point is it's okay for that grief or for those feelings to linger for a period of time because, one, in my opinion, you're never really going to get over it. It just kind of fades a little bit, but it's always there. And you just got to learn how to cope every day with it. But then two, it's like you're going to handle it differently depending on who it was. So again, I was 19, so a couple years later, my grandfather passed away. He was 86 years old. So for me, that was more of a natural death because he was older.
Right.
When my grandmother died, she was 96, and I think we were all kind of happy at that point because it was like she, at a certain point,
it's expected.
Yes, it's expected,
time.
And she's starting to age a lot, and you're starting to lose, your mental abilities and things like that when you're 96, and so it's kind of like a relief in a way that good, she's not suffering anymore. Even though she was in pretty good health, there was a stroke was involved, and so you're kind of relieved in a way that she's out of that kind of earthly misery because at a certain point the body breaks down.
Right.
So again, depending on the situation, for me it was my grandparents. It was understandable, still sad, still a loss, but it was manageable. But for someone like a friend or some of these other friends or a cousin, especially the suicide, that kind of took me off guard because she was in another state, in Minnesota, and I was in California, and we had been talking back and forth, just kind of catching up because we had met at a family reunion. And it was really cool starting to get to know her. And then all of a sudden I get a message, an email saying that she had passed away. And I kind of figured that there was something that she had done to herself because just in talking to her, I could tell there was some issues.
And this was a friend?
No, this was my cousin.
Your cousin.
A cousin of mine that was in Minnesota. And it had been like a second cousin, type of situation. So my dad was a cousin to her father. And so we had met at a reunion, and so we were talking and just kind of getting to know each other. That next level of family tree, just trying to make those connections. And again, it was kind of shocking because here one moment I'm conversing with her, talking with her, and we're trying to make plans for perhaps a second generation or third generation family reunion type things. And then all of a sudden it's like gone.
Right.
It's like all these plans we had made, they're just like now in limbo. And I think back to Chris, there were times we were hanging out at his beach house or his cabin, and we'd be talking about things. And I remember one time Survivor had a couple songs out back then. One was obviously The Eye of the Tiger, which was the big one from the Rocky movie. But then they had a couple other ones. The Search Is Over was another one. But we couldn't think of the song at the time. It was close to his death, and we're trying to think, and we're like, we just can't think what the song was. And of course, it's a pre-internet, so we can't just go, and pre-Shazam, you can't just hold the phone up, to the radio. So we're thinking. And then all of a sudden, like it was like March, and this was a couple of weeks after he died, the song came on the radio. And I'm like, hey, oh, wait, he's not here. Because that was the song we were trying to think of.
Right.
And so it took a while, too, for me, because we had so many of those moments that, hey, Dodger season's coming up, let's get some tickets. Now we have tickets to a Dodger game, and it's like, wait a minute, that's not going to happen. So it was kind of interesting just kind of processing all that. And I don't think anybody truly is ready to deal with it, but you got to find your way but you do have to deal with it. You just can't let it fester. And then B, you have to find a way to deal with it your way. And even though people will give you advice, I still think you have to be able to handle it your way.
Yeah, I think giving yourself grace is the key, or one of the keys. And I have to, full disclaimer, I have not lost a spouse or a parent or a sibling. I've lost great grandparents, and I've lost some grandparents recently, but not. I haven't had a personal. Obviously my daughter's best friend was very difficult for our family, but I have not had a close person pass yet. So I want to make that, very clear. It's hard. I don't want to come off as saying that I know something that I haven't personally experienced. But, giving ourselves grace, because I hear a lot of people say when they lose someone, especially if it's someone in the immediate family, they're setting 4 dinner places, at the table, and now there's only 3 people. or they're making coffee for two people and there's only one. All those places where the person was in our life, the songs on the radio, the driving, the routes that we took when we were driving, talking on the phone at certain times of the day. It takes it's hard. We have to grieve every single one of those. It triggers every time we come across one of those, and it's like it reopens the wound. And I think especially in the first year, people say it's so difficult because it's breaking those patterns, it's breaking those habits where they're just not there anymore. But giving ourselves grace. Some people I've heard, say that make sure that you cry, or make sure that you allow yourself the freedom to feel what you're feeling. Because some people just don't, just in regular life, even if they're not grieving, it could be anything. They just don't give themselves permission to feel. They don't know how to name their feelings and their emotions. They don't know how to manage their emotions. So a lot of times people just push things down, and that's certainly, not healthy. But just giving ourselves the grace just to feel and just to be. And there are support groups where people get it. A lot of times our friends don't get it, and it's difficult I know there's a couple people on my Instagram feed who have lost people, and I'm going to tell on myself. I do get that. It's like, gosh, it's been like how many years? Like and the post on the Instagram post is still lamenting as if it happened yesterday. And I just want to like say, gosh, but that's my own, That's my own heart that's not in the right place. That is my own heart that's not being a servant to that person at that time. And I be supportive. I don't just pass it by. I make sure that I either like it or comment or something, but it does it pulls at me. It's like, oh my gosh, because it's just, I don't know what that is about us, that we don't want other people to hang on to what they've lost.
See, I'm one of those because I'll post something every February 4th for Chris, usually on, actually what I did was I created this video. Kenny Chesney came out with a song one time, Who You'd Be Today. Mm-hmm. And it talks about untimely death of young people.
Oh, wow.
And so I edited it down, and I took a lot of pictures that I had from our youth, and I created a video, mm-hmm. A music video, a slideshow video. And so every February 4th, I'll post that and replay it or
mm-hmm.
repost it on social media, especially Facebook, because it's too long for Instagram. Mm-hmm. And so I'll do that, and then I'll post a picture. And then recently, October 20th is the anniversary death of my grandfather. So, and he died at 10:20 at night. So it's 10:20, 10:20.
Okay.
So it's easy to remember. So I did that too on Instagram, remembering my grandfather on this day. And for me, it's something that I just like to do because, and I don't do it to everybody, but I do it to those two because they were two meaningful people in my life. My grandfather was widely and hugely instrumental, and I was the oldest grandson, and so I was fortunate enough to be the oldest. Mm-hmm. When I died, I was 19. All my other cousins, were much younger. My brother younger, mm-hmm. and so they didn't have the relationship I did with them.
Right.
And then of course with my friend. So, and then there's another friend of mine. Every August, I did another music video with him, kind of slideshow, mm-hmm. and I'll post that and play that.
Now, doing an anniversary, that's totally, understandable.
Like the anniversary of the death?
Yeah, it's totally understandable to post remembrances or to post things that we have done with the person. But I think there's just one person in particular that the post is more of an everyday grief that is like so fresh and so raw, even though it was many years ago, over something. Yeah, that's just, I'm not saying that this is a good thing that I'm feeling that way. I do get a little bit irritated with it. That is my own selfish heart. So why do you think that is, that we don't want people to continue to be in this pain or this grief process? Like, what is that we get so impatient with each other if we think that the grief takes too long? See, I think that's what I learned at the young age after losing Chris, was that grief can be a long time. A lifetime.
There was years later that I would go spend time with his dad, mm-hmm. and he would want me to take him to the cemetery. And we go to the cemetery, and he's German, so he'd leave these little notes in German. Mm-hmm. And so I've never really read what they said because I don't speak German. And I never really translated because I thought it was a personal thing. Mm-hmm. But I know years later, the pain is still there for the father. Obviously the mother too, the sister.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know why we want to get over. I think we're just in one of those places where we want everything to be happily ever after, And sometimes happily ever after just doesn't exist, or happily ever after just kind of
no, certainly
isn't
not.
there.
Certainly not on this planet
Right.
either.
And I think that's what we like. I think we want to be able to have everybody feel good and be good and not have all these problems. But that
maybe it's codependent on my part. Maybe it's
Maybe it's you.
because because you said that so easily. Wow.
No, but here's the thing. You mentioned earlier, and that's the point. You mentioned earlier that you were been fortunate enough not to have and experience that loss. Okay, that's extremely fortunate. I'd rather be in your position than kind of in mine, because when you suffer the loss, and I know there's a lot of people out there that have all kinds of, I mean, there's tragic losses in accidents. I mean, we mentioned the Saugus school shootings just recently. I mean, you think about the
terrible.
Thousand Oaks, shooting, any of them. I mean, it's all tragic. Vegas, the whole thing, and you've got a lot of people that are still struggling and suffering and PTSD and trying to get over all these events.
PTSD,
and it's like, how can we think that these people, I mean, one time I was working at a radio station and we interviewed a lady whose granddaughters or grandchild, I think they're granddaughters, but two of them were perished in the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay. And so she had to go to the preschool and try to figure out what's going on after the Oklahoma City bombing. And this was years later. She was still, wanting revenge on, I guess it was Terry Nichols. He was the lone guy that was left. And at one point she had been working so hard to get an interview with him because she wanted to know why. Why did you do this to my grandkids? Finally, the Federal Board of Corrections or whatever granted her an interview. So she was going to interview Terry Nichols. And at the last minute, she decided, you know what? I'm not going to do it. I got to get over this. And she never went and interviewed him. And that was the moment that she decided that she was going to start to heal. And so this was so many years later.
Yeah.
So for her, it took many, many years and almost an interview with the person that did it. And then there's others that probably never get over it. You go into depression. I know a lot of people, my dad's a Vietnam vet. He just got back recently from a reunion. I know there's a lot of people, from a wartime era that are still struggling today with the loss. And my dad has told me stories, and I can see why the trauma and that is still there.
Yeah, and I don't think, I think what you just said, we're expecting people to get over it. I think there's no such thing as getting over it. I think that's a phrase that keeps people, it keeps us all in an unhealthy place, that we're expecting people to get over it. And grief, especially someone that dies, is not something to get over. It's something to learn how to navigate better. Once we go through the weepy, process of the first year, we can handle it a little bit better. But I don't think we ever get over it. And I think that's what we're expecting people to do, is just to get over it. And that's just not something that is a fair expectation, because it's a lifetime. It's until we pass, that we're missing a part of ourselves. And of course, if I were to lose someone right next to me, I would be a basket case, and of course I would never get over it. But I just think it's interesting how we have a difficult time carrying each other's grief and walking and being patient enough to allow that person to grieve the way that they need to grieve and process it for as long as they need to.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. You mentioned earlier the music, the songs, things in life that we do. Okay. And now, again, you've been fortunate enough not to have to suffer that loss that a lot of people have, including myself. But what about relationships? Okay. You mentioned songs, and the first thing that comes to my mind outside of, the loss of someone in death is breakups. I learned early on, back in high school, when you date somebody, don't bring your favorite music to the relationship. Because that really screws it up when the relationship ends.
It does.
How many cassettes I've chucked out because the girl screwed it up for me. But so when you take it to that level, okay, now you're dealing with something that is more common, I would imagine. I would imagine that there was a point in time in your life that you experienced a bad breakup, or maybe the guy left you for some reason, and that put you into a frenzy or something. Could you relate to that type of loss? Well,
that type of loss, no. The type of loss that really, really set me back and really put me in an unhealthy place was my parents' divorce.
Okay.
That really sent me over the edge. And I had a very difficult time dealing with their divorce, because and I think parents don't realize, especially parents that are getting a divorce, but their parents are not divorced, and so they don't understand what it is, the damage that they're doing to the family unit. This is our mom, this is our dad. this, it's our DNA. We're, and then all of a sudden it's split up and we're with other people. That's not natural. It's just not natural. And to a kid, it doesn't matter how old you are. It's just not natural for your parents to be apart and then for them to be with other people. And that I grieved probably way too long. And it took me...
why? I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but why did you say way too long? I'm curious about that about that comment. Who made you think that it was too long? Or what made you think it was too long?
I guess let me rephrase that. I was angry way too... Maybe I think what I should say is I didn't grieve soon enough, and I was angry way too long and didn't process the anger and didn't process what I was feeling. And so the grief process is something that you have to enter into intentionally. Like, I am going to feel this pain. I'm going to sit with a safe person. I'm going to talk about how I feel. And then the safe person is going to help me with those feelings and validate what it is that I'm feeling. And because I didn't do that I was just angry. And gosh, and even with Bill Clinton, when he was with, when Monica Lewinsky, I was so angry. Or there were people in our life group at church that were divorced and complaining about their stepkids. And I was so angry. And I was taking all this anger out on other people who were divorced and remarried, or people that I saw on TV. And I was just really, really angry. And what I needed to do was process that. And I think that's where people get stuck, is that we think that grieving is mourning the loss, and we are, but then we never get to that next step of processing that and entering into the grief process and feeling all of those feelings and keep moving. I think we get stuck, and maybe that's why we get frustrated with each other. And it did take me way too long. I was just angry, and I was stuck there for many, many years, and it did a lot of damage to myself, to my relationships, to friendships. And, I was mad. I wanted to be mad. I didn't want to forgive. I didn't want to move on. It took a toll. Yeah, it takes a toll when we don't process it and keep moving.
I was reminded recently, probably a few weeks ago, from a student came to talk to me about some stuff. And I initially wanted to offer advice. And I think this is where we kind of get into trouble ourselves, is you mentioned, okay, people are grieving, get over it, because we want them to feel better. But we also want to give them the advice on how to get better. But this was what I was reminded that I'm thinking about as we're talking about this, is sometimes people just want to vent. People just want to talk. And sometimes the best we can do is just listen. And I've known that all along, but when I've gotten into teaching more regularly now, full time, it seems like we as, older people, we're a couple years older than, the people that we're trying to talk to through this.
Just a couple.
But it's like we're trying to let you guys know the stuff that we've gone through, so you don't have to experience that. And sometimes, I've had to learn that it's okay just to listen and not have an answer, not to be quick with, okay, this is how you solve the problem. And there tends to be a trend in education now where it's student-based learning from the standpoint of, here's the problem. Students are used to the professors or their teachers in high school or their counselors or whomever telling them the answer. But it's like, we need to step back and you need to figure out the problem, and let's just guide you. And I think a lot of times, I've never done counseling or anything like that, but I think sometimes that's what counselors, because I have some friends that are counselors, that's what they kind of do. They kind of just walk you through the conversation into self-discovery of, here is what I need to do. And I think sometimes we need to do that. Come alongside somebody.
Right.
Instead of be the answer, come alongside them, walk the journey with them, just be there with them. Because this is the thing that I learned too late after Chris died. Someone said, because I felt like I had to be there and do something. Like, I don't know, I had to be there and do something. And then when I felt like I wasn't doing anything, I wouldn't show up because I felt like I was in the way. Well, a few years later, a pastor told me, he said, you know what, the best thing to do in that type of situation, if it ever happens again, is just be there.
Yeah. Sit
on the couch and just let them do their thing, and you just be there.
Right. And here's the interesting part about what you just said, and kind of what I've been saying, is that when we feel like we have to have an answer, or when we feel like we want to do the right thing, or take care of this person, or we want this person to move through the grief process a little bit quicker so that we don't have to hear it or whatever, that's all about me. That's all about us. That's about our discomfort level. That's about our not wanting to sit with this person and just be. That's why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, because we're supposed to do more listening than we are speaking. And you're absolutely right. I've been to a ton of counseling, and the best counselors are the ones who walk alongside of us and guide us to allow us to come to our own discovery and our own conclusion. That's when the growth process happens. And so if we talk at people and say, you should grieve, we start shoulding all over people. You should be grieving this way and you should be over it by now. That's just very selfish on our part. Sitting with them, listening, allowing them to talk, allowing them to cry, allowing them to change the conversation. There's so many triggers, music and scents and, smells and touches and clothes, and you can be talking with someone, then all of a sudden they'll get triggered and the tears come, and all of a sudden you can just see that they're right back into that place with that person. So to be a friend that is strong enough to handle that, strong enough to allow them to interrupt whatever's going on and let them sit there and cry and remember and ask them questions, what are you remembering right now, and to allow them to tell the story and to be patient with that. That is the best kind of friend, and that means that we are putting them and their grief more important than our own comfort level, our own need to come up with an answer, our own need to try and fix it, our own need to try and make them feel better. That's not our job. Our job is to love them and to support them and honor them and allow them to grieve the way that they need to.
Yes, don't should on me. That's the slogan for this episode. Don't should on me.
Don't should on people. I'm going to should all over you.
Don't
shoulda. You should do this.
It's interesting too, because one of the things that I have a hard time with, if I can take your standpoint, is the loss of pets.
Oh, that is the worst.
That is huge. So I was working with a guy who had a cat. And he was a difficult guy to work with in the radio business, but I just stayed professional with him and did my job. And we eventually grew to have an understanding. And then we grew to have a work relationship where he wasn't such a bad guy anymore. And he treated me with respect, and, we got along. Mm-hmm. Well, his cat died. And because he was a difficult guy to work with, people were making fun of him for the loss of his cat.
Oh, that is so sad.
So I walked up to him one time when I was working with him, and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry for the loss of your cat." And he snapped at me. He goes, "What do you mean by that?" Thinking I was making. I'm like, "No, dude. Yeah. I'm literally sorry you lost your cat. It can't be easy. I know you talked about your cat all the time, and just sorry." And he was like, "Oh, thank you." And he didn't know I was serious. Mm-hmm. But see, for me, it's kind of hard because people treat pets like people now.
Oh yeah.
And there's a conversation that one particular radio talk show host has had. If there's a stranger and there's your pet, mm-hmm. and you can only save one, who would you save? And everybody chooses their pet.
Question.
Yeah, everybody chooses their pet. That's not the conversation that we're having here. But here's the point: people put a lot of emotion, pets are people now. They're part of the family. I'm a fur baby mom, or I'm a fur baby dad. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now I don't understand that world because that's just not me. But I can.
Do you have pets?
No. I used to, growing up, had dogs all the time and had cats. I had them all, rabbits, the whole thing. I can't stand pets now because I've had too many growing up. But and then, of course, spending time in the Midwest, especially in farm country, animals take on a whole new meaning. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. But anyways, so again, you're dealing with, and when you deal with pets, like for me, I have come to the understanding and the growth to know that people take their pets and loss of pets very seriously. Mm-hmm. You see posts on, it's funny because you mentioned the person who lost somebody posting on Instagram, remember pictures and stuff. I see posts all the time of my pet dog died, my pet cat died. It's everywhere. And it's almost more rampant with the animals than it is with people.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be right there soon because our dog is 16, God bless her. And so I'm thinking, man, this is her last Christmas. This is her last Thanksgiving. I don't want to be cynical, but like, how long can a dog... I can't imagine that she would, last a whole nother year. So I'm like sad. We have a dog and a cat, and the cat is 1 and the dog's 16, and yeah, I'll be posting, stuff because she.
So you'll understand then at that point why people post.
Well, we've also lost. I have never not had an animal ever in my entire life. So for 52 years, I've had one dog after. This is the first cat. I'm not really a cat fan, but one dog after another. So I've lost multiple dogs.
So do you have a process in mind already about how you're going to go about the grieving process when the dog passes?
No.
Is going to cross that bridge when it happens?
No, yeah, I'm just going to cross that bridge when it happens. I'm already gearing up for it. I already know it's coming. We're trying to give her as many hugs and, cuddles.
Because that's the one thing when it comes to that, it's such a big part of everybody's life that when an animal dies, people will assume that, it's just a pet. Because I was kind of that way. I mean, I was always been sympathetic because I know, I value animals too, but I just have a little different perspective. I don't think of them as a part of the family.
Have you seen that movie? I think it's called A Dog's Life.
Not A Dog's Purpose?
That's it.
The one, there's one where the dog dies and keeps coming back.
Yeah. The first one, yeah.
I refuse to see animal movies.
It is so, okay, I sat and cried the whole time. And then I came home and I told my dog, Ginger, I said, because she is one of those, The Dog's Purpose, like she just is this incredible, loving, comforting dog. She has been such a blessing. And I came home and I literally told her, I said, you did a great job. You've done your job well. You brought us lots of comfort. You brought us lots of love. And I am going to miss you so much, when it's your time. But I just want you to know that you have done your job well. And thank you. And of course, she doesn't understand a word that I'm saying.
She's just like, where's the food?
Right. But yeah, I've told her that several times. I'm like, you've done your job well, because dogs are great, especially now with depression, anxiety. They're great comforters. They're great ways to calm down anxiety and depression. They're great companions. You walk in the door and they're just so excited to see you, and they just, love you and they're amazing.
And that's why they're important, and that's why people cling to their animals. But then when they lost other people that are kind of like me, or, that view animals a little bit differently, they will put these stipulations and the should-haves, they should all over the animal people about, hey, it's just a pet, it's just a dog, it's just a cat, it's just a bird, it's just a hamster. It's just a chinchilla, whatever. But there's still that emotional attachment that people have to get over and go through that process. And that's okay. It's okay for them to go through that process of grief over an animal because it's important to them. And I think that's what it's getting to. It doesn't matter if it's a loss of a person, if it's a loss of a relationship, if it's a, love romance relationship, or maybe like a parent relationship, like in your parents' divorce, if it's an animal, if it's maybe somebody, there's some people that I know that have gone off to prison for different things, and there's that loss, that separation that people are grieving with. I mean, so there's different types of things, but the point is, I guess, for this whole thing is that the best thing to do is to come up alongside that person and to be there with them and to walk the journey with them and to just be a support and be like, if there's anything you need, I am here, because we don't know. I mean, we could offer advice. I've had people come to me and say, how did you handle the loss of, Chris? And so I'd share my story on how I did it, but I wouldn't tell them you should do this. I just said, this is how I dealt with it. This is, and this is what I learned from it. And if I was to offer a suggestion, maybe you should try this or go see somebody. Actually, I would tell them go see somebody, because I think that was the thing I didn't do, was talk about it.
Right.
But I think we just need to come alongside people, let them do the process themselves, no matter how long it is. Like you said, don't should all over them, and just be a friend. Just be there. Whether it's be there in silence because you're just sitting on the couch, or whether it's be there to listen, quick to listen, slow to speak, or if it's to be there, maybe offer your experience to it, and then again, it's important to find somebody, I think, that can relate. If someone lost an animal, I might not be the best one to come talk to. I'll listen.
I'm not coming to you.
Yeah, no, I'll listen, but I can't offer anything because, I'm just not me. But if you lost somebody else, I would be a little bit more understanding because I can relate to it a little bit different,
Right.
And so I think it's important too to find the right person, because not everybody, and that goes the same too. I've been listening to some students, in case you don't know, I teach at a community college, and I've been listening to students and they've been getting advice, and it's academic advice, but it still relates. And I told a student the other day, because she got some advice and I disagreed with the advice that she got. And I was like, okay, you want to do this. The teacher is telling you to do something different. Okay. I mean, that your academics don't match up with what you want to do in life. She wants to be in entertainment, and the academics, the teacher was saying you should go into academics as your education, and then you can try to apply your academics into the media. I disagree with that. But anyways, but you listen to people and the advice, and it's like, how is that advice or the person telling the advice, are you really thinking of the person that's there? Okay, on the broad scope of things, maybe that type of advice is okay to give students if you're thinking on the broad scope of students in general. But sometimes you have to sit and specifically look at somebody. Okay, this person lost a pet. This person lost a brother, a sister. This person lost a grandparent. This is a divorce. This is a breakup. Each one is going to have an individual and independent way of dealing with that and those emotions. We think grief is one way. Oh, we're sad.
No.
It's going to be different. And that's what we have to remember. There's not one universal answer to solve all those problems. And I think when you mentioned earlier, why do we tell people to get over it? Because we want them to be happy and we want them to feel better. But we think that there's the universal answer that, okay, it's been this amount of time, you should be done with it.
But let's take that a step forward. I totally agree with that. We want them to be better. We want them to be happy. But let's keep multiplying that out. Why do we want them to be better and we want them to be happy?
Do you have an answer for that?
I do. I was
well, you
I'm
tell
testing
me.
you.
Well, no, I just think it's that way because that's the human nature. Human nature doesn't like suffering.
Right, because we don't want to deal with it. And so if they're in our presence and they're still grieving, and we think that they should be further along because we don't want to deal with it. And that's so really this conversation that's twofold is that if you are a person that's grieving, purposely entering into that grief process with a counselor or with a safe person and processing that grief to metabolize it in a healthier way is absolutely key. But on the flip side, as the friend, it kind of comes back to what we've been talking about in the other episodes. It boils down to our character. Are we really for the other person or are we for ourselves? And a lot of times we are for ourselves. And so we are uncomfortable when people are grieving or uncomfortable because then now we have to enter into that and we don't want to. And so that means that we're for ourselves and we want people to be happy and we want people to be moving along so that we don't have to deal with it and we don't have to see it. We don't like suffering. We don't like visible sin, visible mistakes. We want everything to be nice and clean. And so we just have to, if we're having trouble not relaxing, not being able to relax in the comfort or in the presence of someone who is grieving, that's on us. We have to check ourselves and say, why am I so... Because it's hard. It's really hard because we feel like we have to have an answer. We feel like we have to do something, right? And there's nothing to do. Sometimes there was a lady who years ago lost her son. He took his life. And we were leaving the memorial and I just hugged her out in the street and I said, I have no idea what to say, but I'm a mom and I get it. I feel your pain as a mom. I feel your pain. And I just hugged her. And a couple of weeks later, she said to me, that was the nicest thing that anybody had said to me because we try to offer these, silly things like, oh, they're in a better place. Well, what's better than right here with us? At least they're not suffering anymore. Well, right. We're so dismissive and we say these things that are just not helpful. And sometimes the best thing to do is to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm here and I'm just going to sit here. And if we don't talk for the next 3 hours, it is okay. And I'm just going to sit here and be with you. It's hard to do that. It's hard to be comfortable enough on our own skin to be able to sit there and absorb something that is just so uncomfortable.
Well, it's like you said, it puts us in an uncomfortable situation because
and we don't like it.
Because I remember there was a time that I learned from when Chris died, the thing was just be there.
Yeah.
So that's what happened. I went to, there was somebody else, I didn't really know them that well, but I went along for support with another friend who was closer to the family that lost, and I just sat there. Mm-hmm. And then somebody sat down next to me. I didn't know who they were. And I'm just sitting there. Well, it turned out to be, I think, the uncle. Mm-hmm. And we were just talking. I didn't find out till afterwards that he was the uncle. And we were just talking. And so I was just, listening to what he was saying and, not really saying much. I think I might have mentioned a few, experiences I had or whatever. But it's just listen. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's all we need to do is we need to be awkward. We need to be uncomfortable, but we just need to come alongside these people. And the other thing too, from an educator's perspective, I had a student who last spring, I guess it was spring of 2019, lost his dad. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so obviously I understood this. And so he had some time away from class, time away from school. And I don't have him in the current semester, but I still cross paths with them through the radio station. And it still affects him. Obviously it's his dad.
Yeah.
But it's like,
That'll
that's
be
the other
tough.
thing too. You got to keep in mind that even though if you're on the periphery, maybe you're not friends, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's somebody else. You don't know what this person's going through, and sometimes you have to show them and be there in a support, and that's one way you can support them. You might not know them, but maybe they're a student or somebody like that, and you could be like, you know what? Take care of your business. We'll work out school later.
Yeah.
Take care of what you have to do. Don't worry about your assignments right now. We'll take care of it. Because that sometimes can speak volumes. Just taking the pressure off of somebody, no matter who it is, of having to do those daily responsibilities. It's like the people that come and bring the food so they don't have to cook and worry about that.
Right.
Sometimes
Right.
just, okay, maybe you're a coworker. Maybe you're going to sacrifice a couple of hours on a day, and maybe you get 3 or 4 coworkers to sacrifice a couple of hours of their time to fill a shift.
Yeah.
Because that person might just need a day off. And that could be anything. That could be just the person going through any type of maybe relationship problems. Maybe their kid is acting out, whatever the case may be. Sometimes coming alongside somebody goes beyond just being there, and that moment,
Right.
it might be, okay, you know what? You need some time away. We're going to fill this in. You need some time away. Worry about your assignments later. You need some time away. Take the day off.
And I've heard too from people that they say it's, if somebody asks, we always want to say, oh, if you want me to do anything for you, let me know. We're here. It's all well intentioned, but the person who's grieving, I've heard multiple times, just do it. Don't ask me because the person who's grieving is not going to pick up the phone and say, oh, so and so said that they would help me. They're in such a state of devastation and a state of loss that they don't have the energy to pick up the phone and say, hey, can you do whatever. And so I've heard that just do it. That Rick Warren, when their son took his life, he said that their life group just came over to their house and didn't ask. They just pretty much came over and they slept on the floor, they slept on the couch, and they were there for like 2 or 3 days and cooked, for them and made sure, but they didn't leave. They just stayed with them, in those initial days. I heard another story tonight. I was listening to the Rusty George podcast. Rusty's the preacher at our church, and he lives on the street. Apparently, he said this during his podcast. He lives on the same street as the deceased girl and her best friend that survived. I guess they all live in the same neighborhood of the Saugus school shooting. And so he said it was so tough because in the neighborhood, one family was bringing home their daughter and the other family was coming home without their daughter. And so I guess the neighborhood, the way that he described it in his podcast, they put out these candles along the sidewalks, lining, to the houses, and loving on, both families and welcoming them home. And then they also started a meal train for them. And then also, believe it or not, reached out to the shooter's mom, apparently, and started a meal train for her as well, because she's also grieving. She's also lost her son. He was in a lot of pain, and it's just horrible. But the more that we can not judge, the more that we can come around and sit with people and just love on them without questions. We don't need to know how they're feeling necessarily. Let them volunteer the information. We don't need to ask details about the accident, details about the situation, unless they want to volunteer it. But just to be there and just to sit with them and just to love on them is enough. It's enough just to be there.
You mentioned people not wanting to share. So my friend Chris died. I was 18. He was 17. It took me up until I went and had dinner recently with them almost about a year ago. And I finally got the final answers to what happened that night.
Oh, wow.
Because I never asked.
Oh, wow.
I never wanted to bring that up. But there were instances where I'd be driving through that area at night and it was similar. The fog set in, the rain set in because it was a rainy night. So throughout the years, I've kind of pieced things together. But through conversation, I finally got the final answers, and it was many, many years later.
Wow.
And now I have as much closure as I'm going to get. But so when you mentioned they might not want to talk about it, it took a number of years, almost a lifetime, to figure out all the final details of what happened. And then the mom told me after the dad steps aside, said he's never talked about that ever. And so I got the closure I was looking for, and I was truly appreciative of it. But sometimes that's what it is. It's like I said, it doesn't come back to us. It's not about us. It's about that person.
Right.
It's about them and their situation and coming alongside them and maybe not having the answers. You might be curious, but you know what? You might not get the answers.
Sometimes it's none of our business. You know, it's just none of our business sometimes. And I'm very inquisitive. I'm very curious. All of my life, I have asked way too many questions and been intrusive when I should not have been, because I always want to know all the details. It's none of our business a lot of times. You know, it's so painful, and it depends on the person. You know, some people are more forthcoming. Some people are more, you know, they stuff things down and they don't want to talk about it. The pain is something that none of us want to feel. We just don't want to feel the pain. But unfortunately, the only way to heal is to go through the pain. You can't go over it. You can't go around it. You can't skip that part of the process. You have to enter into it, and you have to feel it with, you know, do it with a safe person, and just say, I'm hurt, I'm angry, and whatever emotions come up during that painful time, because sometimes we feel ashamed for the things that we feel. And so we're like, oh gosh, I shouldn't be feeling that way. And then we feel ashamed because we're ashamed. And then it just wraps us up in a knot. And then we get stuck. And so the more that we can feel that pain, but at our own pace, you know, with a safe person, and it's not up to us as the friend to provoke the griever into that pain process. They have to be ready. It has to be at their pace, their timing. When they're ready, and we may not be that safe person for them. It could be somebody else. So we have to honor that as well and not be offended. You know, they may be better off with somebody else. So I think it's a lot of checking ourselves, a lot of a gut check. You know, why am I agitated with this person, or why am I not comfortable? And some of us we don't call the griever. We don't come around because we don't know what to say. We feel so uncomfortable that we just avoid them completely, you know, probably like you were talking about with your friend, you know, because we don't know how to handle it. So we go away, and then they're lonely. And then there's rejection on top of the abandonment.
Yeah, see, that's the one regret, I guess. I don't know if it's regret's the right word, but the one thing when I look back on, I just should have been there more for the parents.
You're shooting on yourself.
I am. I'm shooting all over myself. I'm full of should. But that's the thing. That's my mentality. Even to this day, years later, is I should have been there more. Just there.
Yeah.
I should have just been there. Now, that's just me, and that's nobody else shooting all over me. I'm going to shoot on myself. But when I think back, that's what I could have done that more. And that would have been in a better situation because I would have just been there. And that's the one thing that I learned from that is just be there for them, no matter what it is.
Why didn't you go around the family?
Because I thought to be honest, I thought I was a nuisance. I thought just by being there, I was in the way. I thought by being there, it was like, what do I say? I didn't realize I could just sit there and not say anything. I didn't have anything to say. How do you say something?
Yeah.
You know, after a while, I've said everything I've had to say that I can say as an 18-year-old suffering the loss of a friend. I didn't know what to say. And I felt just by being there it would be awkward. I felt like I'd be in the way. I felt like they'd have to entertain me. And they obviously didn't maybe want to do that. I didn't understand that just by sitting there on the couch or sitting there in the downstairs room, maybe watching TV, whatever the case, sitting in the kitchen, whatever the case may be, just by being there.
Yeah,
in the same room.
They were second parents.
Yeah, they're second parents.
So they probably thought you were a second son, and by not being there, they lost two sons.
Yeah, and that's. Thank you. Just made me depressed now. I've never thought of it that way, but that's true. It's a very true point. Oh, thank you. That gives me a lot to think about. But no, it's a very true point. It's very valid because just by being there, you don't compound the loss, I guess, like you just mentioned. You know, that's compounding loss. And it's kind of an interesting point that you bring up. I never thought of it that way. I have to mull that over for the next 30 years.
Take a moment.
Next 30 years. No, but that's the point. Just like you said, just by being there.
Yeah.
Now, we would get together with some other friends and stuff and show up every once in a while. They had us over for dinner. But just the point of being there.
Yeah.
And so that's why I didn't. And so when I look back on, that's the one thing I would say is that from my experience, if you have someone that goes through something like that, it could be, I mean, I remember just a few weeks earlier, my friend Chris, he was dating a girl and they broke up, and he was grieving that loss, and he showed up at my house unexpected, and I had a lot of stuff to do that day because it was high school, and I stopped everything. I thought I was in the middle of washing my car. And it stopped everything, and we just sat there for hours just watching TV or whatever it was, or just talking or whatever in the living room. And I blew everything off for the day. And we were just there. And so that moment, when he died, I thought back to that moment. I'm like, you know what? I'm glad that I blew everything off that day and we just sat there because he needed me there that day.
Yeah.
But it didn't click that's what I could have done after he passed away.
Physical presence is huge. We discount the fact that our aura, when we're physically present with someone, we don't have to use our words. We can just physically, our aura, just be with someone in the room, and that is enough. We discount that. I know that there are there's a person who just says, "Oh, he'll say to me, I'm so glad that you're here," and we don't really talk, we don't really have a conversation, but it's just the fact that when we sit with people, we are honoring the space that they're in. We're honoring the fact that they're not feeling well. They could be sick with the flu, they could be suffering from depression, they could be suffering from a loss, whatever it is. It's just our physical presence is enough, and we just get so wrapped up in ourselves of thinking that we have to say or do or be active. We think that the energy is coming from what it is that we're doing, and it's not. The energy is coming from one heart to another, just being, and that is where the connection is, and that is where the comfort comes from. That's where the hope comes from. That's where the love and validation come from. It's just being able to be together and not necessarily having to say anything, but like, I'm here. My body's here. I'm physically here. I'm physically present, and emotionally present, and that's enough.
Well, as we begin to wrap things up, I'll give you the final word, but the two things that I've learned today is, one, don't should on me. Don't should on people because it's
and
bad.
Especially not yourself. Don't should all over yourself. Shoulda, coulda, woulda.
And then the other thing too is be there, because like you had just told me, which I didn't think about, by maybe not being there, it compounds the loss. Because if they've had family, if Chris, had friends over a lot, and things like that, and there are parties at his house, and there'd be swim parties, and I mean, just it was a house that was vibrant with young people, and then all of a sudden we stopped showing up after he died. That compounds the loss even more, because now the house is empty and those parties are done, and all the future parties, the graduation parties, now that you say that, thinking back on it, we could have thrown graduation parties and probably asked them, hey, can we use your house for a graduation party for all the friends to come and just celebrate? It's 4th of July or whatever, his birthday, whatever the case may be. Can we do that? And they might have said yes. But see, the thought is, oh, we're going to burden them. We don't want them to be sad because he's not here. But it might have been the flip side, where they might have embraced that, because now, instead of having this empty house after all these friends were over, throughout the years in high school, now it's like it's double compounded because no one's there now.
And there's the second point. Not only should we not should on ourselves, we also shouldn't assume that we know what other people want or don't want. And a simple question, hey, is this, it's hard for us not to come over here because we're missing Chris, but is it also hard for you? Like, would it be nice if we came over, or would you rather us not? Asking the simple question is a really good thing, because they may have appreciated the company.
Yeah. That's true. But that's what I learned, is don't should on me. Don't should on anybody when it comes to the grief process. And then be there, because not only is it good, but you could be compounding the loss by not being there, which would just magnify the situation even more, depending on, the situation.
Right.
So that's what I got out of this today. I'll let you have the final word.
I actually saw tears in your eyes, and so I'm still there. I'm still back there. I don't know that I have a final word other than that when we have conversations with people and we're gentle, that's the fruit that comes out of the conversation, is that we have these realizations, and it's okay, and it's fabulous, and there's insight, and that's where the healing comes from. That's where the growth comes up from. So when we sit with a safe person and just chew the fat, just talk about, whatever it is, that's being with someone and allowing people just to be who they are. And those tears were nice, man.
Yeah, that's real. You opened up a whole new thought process for me now. Two Steps Ahead Podcast is what we are. You can find us on Instagram at Two Steps Ahead Podcast. My personal Instagram is at Edem Rocks, EIDEM ROCKS.
And I am at Tara Hoke Shiro on Instagram, TaraHokeSchiro.
Don't be afraid to reach out to us. You can reach out to us also at Two Steps Ahead Podcast at Gmail if email is a little bit more convenient for you. But feel free to reach out. Let us know what you think. If you have any advice or any thoughts that you want to add to this, that would be great too.
Questions you want us to answer?
Questions, topics you'd like us to talk about, and also YouTube, coming to YouTube with the videos too. So, hey, thanks for listening. We appreciate it. Do tell a friend, and we'll see you down the road here on Two Steps Ahead Podcast.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.